So let's go into the 3D print process a little bit because I'm trying to get a general understanding of what it is and what it is not. And because I think of 3D printing, I think of this process of building this little plastic figurine or this piece of plastic that is going to be used very specifically around the house or the office and or whatnot. So I just wanted to get a general understanding. When we say 3D gun, is the entire gun made out of the 3D print material or is it only some?
Okay, actually, that's a good question, Jason. So the firearms we're coming across now, we consider them hybrid 3D. So the whole gun itself is not 3D printed, and it's not made of polymer plastic, which is generally the material that's used to 3D print, like you said, figurines. So just to give you a bit of a background on 3D printed firearms, in 2012, Cody Wilson, a gentleman from the US, he actually made the first 3D printed firearm, which was a single shot pistol. And it was completely made of polymer plastic, except for I believe, the firing pin and some screws. And it wasn't very durable, but what he did is he published the digital blueprints for this 3D printed firearm on the internet, online. So that was in 2012, roughly. So 3D printed firearms have been around for the last 10 years now. And from there, it's evolved. And, to your point about the figurines and that, you're right, 3D printers have obviously other uses than just 3D printed firearms. And it's widely used, you're right, to create figurines. And I think 3D printers themselves became more widely known during COVID because I'm sure people have heard stories of, protective equipment, face masks, etc., being manufactured using 3D printers. So that became more well known. And from there, I think, because this is my theory at least, because of the COVID lockdown, quarantine, people were at home and, people are on the internet surfing and, perhaps, people are like, hey, there's all these 3D printed firearm blueprints online. Perhaps, I could try and build one just for curiosity's sake. So, like I said, these blueprints and schematics are widely available online. They're not restricted at all. The 3D printers themselves, you can get one for as low as $200 US and as high as up to $10,000 if you want really high quality. But yeah, so the 3D printed firearms. So right now what we're seeing is, as I mentioned, hybrid. So I'll use an example of a Glock semi-auto pistol, which I'm fairly sure people are familiar with. So this is the common firearm we're seeing in Canada, is the hybrid Glock pistol. So when you think of a Glock pistol, there's two main parts to it. There's the frame, which has the grip and the trigger housing. So that itself is generally made of 3D printed polymer plastic. So you can get those schematics online. You can download it to your printer and your computer. And basically it gives the instructions to the 3D printer to literally make this frame. And so once that frame is created, right now, you do still need the conventional, I would call it the upper receiver, which contains the barrel, the slide. That has to be all metal because it bears the pressure of the firing the firearm. So that has to be metal. So when we think of 3D firearms, the whole firearm isn't 3D printed. It's generally the lower half, the frame, say, or the lower receiver. There are 3D printed firearms that are completely made of polymer plastic, but they're not very reliable. But there is one called C9, which is mainly built of 3D polymer plastic, but there's also metal parts in it as well. So right now, most of the firearms that I'm seeing and that are being made are considered hybrid, because until the technology advances where 3D printers can print like metal frames and receivers, the whole firearm in metal, then it's going to continue to be a hybrid 3D polymer frame and firearm, sorry.
Yeah, and so FGC, I have to smile when see what that stands for, F gun control. But you mentioned that you can get a 3D printer for as low as $200, and then the material, the polymer to make these parts to the
Yes.
gun. How expensive are those roughly?
Oh, they're inexpensive too, Jason. Like say for a spool of polymer plastic, you're paying maybe $20, $15 US for a spool.
Okay.
And like I said, with 3D printed firearms, it's so the ability to print these are so easy now because of the cost of printers and the supplies and the availability of the digital blueprints. That's what makes it so appealing to, those who are hobbyists who are generally interested or curious if they can build these things. But on the other side, you have the criminal underworld who are taking advantage of these 3D printed firearms and making them themselves or contracting other people to make them, and
Mm-hmm.
then in turn trafficking these firearms.
I probably watch too much movies and TV, but I'm just thinking, in terms of somebody that's up to no good that would want something like this, is you're going through metal detection, they're looking for that shape of the gun, right? The whole gun itself. But with this might not come up on an X-ray or anything else, at least not the shape that they're looking for. Is that what you
Well,
found as well?
yeah, so Jason, in terms of like airport security and the scanners at the airports, so if you have just the 3D frame itself, so there's no metal, it's just plastic,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to get through the metal detector. I don't believe there's actually, speaking of that, that's a good question. There's actually a company that is currently marketing and they're doing testing at different airports in North America. I know they're doing one in Toronto airport where they're testing, it's called HexWave. And what it is, it's a unique scanner which detects the shape of the item. So it's they're testing it there, and so this would then be a game changer in terms of identifying 3D printed firearms. Because right now, with 3D printed frames, like I said, they're made of plastic. It's going to get through a metal detector. But with this new type of scanner, a 3D HexWave scanner, it's going to detect the shape of the pistol or the firearm. So then it would be more difficult to get that through. But the other big point with these 3D firearms is they're considered ghost guns. And for those who are not familiar with the term, it basically means a firearm that is not traceable. So for a 3D firearm, there's no serial numbers on it, so you can't trace it as compared to a conventional firearm. When they're manufactured, they all have serial numbers, and there's usually some kind of markings on it, say, Smith and Wesson or Glock. But with the 3D printed firearms, there's nothing to identify that firearm. So that's another thing that makes it appealing, is that they are literally untraceable. And that's why they fall under the category of ghost guns, because when these guns are used and they're found somewhere, there's no way you can track who made that gun or who it came from. So that's another big advantage, I guess, for criminals to go down this route of 3D printed firearms.